Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director. It is my privilege to be your haunted host for this episode. In our last show, we invited you to join us in a spooky experiment during the recent total solar eclipse. And you didn't disappoint. After compiling all the data our team members provided, we are ready to unveil the results that are not only unexpected, but also mystifying, sparking more questions than answers. The Estes sessions, where we use audio equipment to potentially communicate with other realms, conducted simultaneously in Toronto and just south of Ottawa, veered into realms both strangely alien and intensely personal. I can't wait for you to hear all the details. But before we get to that, I do have some exciting news to share. Together with our friends at Phantoms of Yore and several heritage sites, we're offering a one-of-a-kind paranormal investigation experience that includes 6 different haunted locations along eastern Ontario's Mississippi River, all in one night. Yes, you heard that right. 6 sites in a single night. This record-breaking investigation is set for May 17th and 18th, 2024, but tickets are quickly selling out. If you're interested in being part of this massive event, make sure to get your tickets as soon as possible. We also have at least 2 ghost tours running in each city right now, as well as our Alone in the Dark experiences in Ottawa and Toronto. And I would like to invite you to come along with us and have a paranormal adventure, a little bit of thrill, and a little bit of chill. For tickets or information about any of our ghost tours, investigations, or online experiences, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Haunted Walk. Be sure to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. It's a pleasure to welcome longtime Haunted Walk tour guide, host, researcher, friend of mine, friend of yours, and friend of the show, the one and only Margot McDonald. Margot, great to see you, and of course, as always, welcome to Haunted Talks.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be back.
We have a lot to cover, a lot of really interesting things to dig into, so let's jump right in. In our last episode, we invited listeners to join us in conducting a few spooky experiments during the recent total solar eclipse. And I'm thrilled to report we had over 40 people participate from Ontario, Quebec, Illinois, Michigan, and Minnesota.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
I think that is fantastic. I wouldn't have expected that many of you out there, so thank you to each and every one of you who participated. You are awesome. And I'm so glad you did, because things are going to get a little weird in this episode, friends. Before we get into it, Margot, can you share with us where you were during the eclipse and why you chose that location?
I was in Toronto, and I chose to do my experiments in the historic distillery district. This is not too far from the lake, and is a old Victorian factory, been renovated and converted into, restaurants and shops and so on. But it is also one of the locations we give ghost tours. And it is, I suddenly realized, probably the only location in Toronto that we give ghost tours at, that we've never actually investigated any of the buildings that we talk about. We've never tried to make contact. So I thought, well, this is the perfect opportunity to try to make contact with the spirits at the distillery district. And I don't just mean the alcohol.
A wonderful tour there. If anyone is from or visiting Toronto, highly recommend that tour. Some great history and great ghost stories. Michelle and I headed just outside of Morrisburg, Ontario, to a farm, actually, where we thought it would be a little more secluded than some of the busier viewing locations in the area, which we thought would be helpful for the Estes session we're going to be talking about a little bit later. And also, we were kind of curious what the animals would do. So we were in the path of totality. I guess, Margot, you were just outside, Toronto?
Toronto was only going to be about 90%, but in the end, sadly, it really didn't matter because there was so much heavy cloud cover that we were unable to see the actual action, though we did see the darkening and lightening, but not to the same extent that we had hoped.
I'll talk about my experience in a moment, but holy cow, it was something. But our first experiment, we asked listeners to join us in kind of trying out, was first just to reflect on how it felt during the eclipse. A great point you make, Margot, during our investigations is really our bodies are often our best source of paranormal investigation equipment. How we're feeling, the impressions we're getting. It's not all about external technology. So that was kind of our first question. How did you feel? On the kind of mental or psychological side, listeners reported primarily feeling calm, relaxed, and connected to others and their environment, including senses of awe and happiness. That 100% matches up with our experience because I'd never seen a total solar eclipse before, and our cloud cover was just light enough that with our special high-tech glasses on, that we could see it. Just something far outside the normal bounds. Did you have any sense of that? I mean, you couldn't see what was actually happening in the sky, I guess, but what about internally? Did you have any of those feelings as well?
We did. We did. I'll say, first of all, that the day before the eclipse and all that day and all night and into the morning of the eclipse, as I was heading out to go do our experiments, I actually had a massive headache, which is rare for me. And I was a bit worried about going into the experiments and especially the Estes method with this massive headache. But opposite to what you might think, actually doing the experiments, the headache vanished and it did not return. And I will say, after we did the Estes method, we then ran outside to do the ESP experiment and to try to at least sense the eclipse. And I will say we were filled, all three of us who were there, myself and two of our other Haunted Walk staff, Sarah and Jillian, we were filled with this kind of giddiness, And it is something to see everybody coming out of their office buildings or their shops and so on, and everybody looking up and just trying to take in the enormity of it. I had a friend say they felt like they were seeing real magic for the first time.
That is a great way to explain it, because even for me, when we hit that moment of totality, I kind of let out a primal scream, which I wasn't planning or had anticipated myself doing. But I think magic is a great word. And that's something we talked about in the last episode of how the eclipse is a time when kind of nature is turned on its head. And your comment about having a headache is very pertinent, because the other highly reported thing had to do with physical discomfort, including headaches, dizziness, and lightheadedness. I wonder what you make of that.
I immediately have a few thoughts. One of them is, how I will always declare myself to be a benevolent skeptic when it comes to all of these things. And I will say that often my skeptical brain jumps forward pretty quickly. So I would say, are they standing with their head back, looking up for long periods of time? And when they move, all of a sudden, it causes that dizzy sensation and so on. Another possible physiological explanation could be because the changing of the light is so strange that it can, like it does for the animals, it can cause you to feel that disorientation of, wait, is it night? Is it day? Where am I? This is a bit scary. There's something, I think, deep in our primal DNA, perhaps, that remembers the kind of danger of that magic that you're watching. But the other side of it is, if you're really in the moment of it, you're giving all of your energy and all of your focus outside of yourself for this period of time, however long it lasted, where you were watching 6 minutes, 8 minutes. And that's not something that we often do. Perhaps if people do meditation or yoga or that kind of thing, they may have felt that before, but you wouldn't be expecting to get into that zone just from watching the eclipse, but I think a lot of people did. And so it can lead to this kind of sense of being out of yourself.
I also had a headache. It came on later, towards the end of the eclipse or once the sun was reemerging, but it lasted an entire day, well into the next day. And, what you're saying kind of resonates with me. Now, we did the Estes session as well, which required even more kind of concentration and openness. But, I also want to mention that one of our experimenters was also on a farm, but they were in Quebec, just outside of the path of totality, and they reported the chickens there did not respond at all. But where we were, the chickens all went into the coop when totality set in. It was so amazing. They thought it was nighttime. So that kind of ties in as well to what you're saying of it's just such an odd time for us to deal with, for our brains to deal with. Let's move on to the second experiment we asked our listeners to play along with. And that was trying to guess the object that you and I were thinking about. We were curious if ESP might be heightened during the eclipse. And we can now reveal what that object was. It was a loonie, a Canadian $1 coin. If you've never seen one before, it's a goldish coin with a loon in the water on one side and Queen Elizabeth II on the other. Margot, I'm curious what you were trying to do to convey this object to our listeners who are thinking about us. What methods were you trying?
We took the coin outside during the height of the eclipse and put it on this old stone rock that had been part of the distillery buildings at one point. And the three of us sat around it, and we had pads of paper and pencils. So as well as looking at the coin and concentrating on it and just trying to send the idea of loonie out into the world, we also, with the pads of paper, drew parts of it, wrote any words associated with it. I was putting things like in your pocket or money or birds, as well as drawing it. And then I took out a pendulum that I had felt inspired to bring with me, and I just stood over it, looking at it, and just had the pendulum circling around it over and over again as the moon made its final pass across the sun.
I held the loonie in my hand the entire time of totality and a few minutes before and after. And then periodically I would kind of read out everything that was on the coin or everything that I could think was connected to the coin. It was kind of imagining my thoughts going up to the sun and then coming back down, maybe into the minds of our listeners. Now, no one managed to get a direct hit on a loonie, which would be amazing. I mean, that's very specific. But there are a few other interesting synchronicities, I think, that came forward. Two guesses were fairly close, I think. We'll see if you agree. One person guessed a tree. And there are, in fact, trees on the image with the loon in the background. That is a correct answer. I did say out loud several times, trees. So that's pretty close. The other one, which was in the realm of possibility, is someone guessed a birdhouse.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think? Are those two, does that surprise you that they were that close?
Let's put it this way. If I had brought all those 40 people in and was looking for someone to bring to the next level of experiment, those would be definitely the two on my list that I would say, I would like to bring you for the next round of ESP experiments and see what happens, because they're hits, in a kind of partial hit, you don't get the exact object, but they're within the realm of possibility of what might come to your mind, especially with you saying the word trees out loud. And if you think of the bird house as the shape of the coin contains the bird, to me, that's even more direct hit than the trees.
I'm so glad you mentioned the shape of the coin, because that's going to get to the one that I find is most anomalous. 5 of our participants guessed the object was a ball.
Oh,
Now, while a coin is not a ball, it certainly is circular, and the coin I was using was very worn down, more or less a circle. And it also made me wonder a little bit, well, about the sun being a circle that everyone is looking at. But it seems odd that 5 people of our 40 or so who responded would have exactly the same guess.
yeah, that is interesting. Ball. How bizarre. Obviously connected with the sun, the ball of fire, the round shape of the moon. So the roundness is in their head already. I hadn't even considered that when we chose the loonie as the object. But yes, definitely on my pad of paper, I was putting round, circle. Definitely, though, you could consider that a partial hit as well.
So that would mean we had 7 partial hits,
Yeah.
which is extraordinary, I think. So to all of you out there who guessed ball, birdhouse, or tree, well done. Well done. We might need to take you to the casino a little bit later. Our final experiment had experimenters use Google to generate random numbers between 1 and 10. And I think this had the most interesting results of all of them so far. Now, this experiment was based on the Global Consciousness Project, a research initiative that investigates the possible interconnections between human consciousness and the physical world, specifically through the influence of major events on random number generators stationed worldwide. Some of the most notable results the project has spotted is unlikely deviations from the expected norms of these random numbers for events that occurred, such as September 11th, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, and the funerals of global figures like Princess Diana. Now, our dataset did indeed have a few anomalies to do with the numbers that came up the most and the least. In total, 137 numbers were generated, and the average times that each number came up was 13.7. However, the number 7 came up 22 times,
Wow.
and the number 4 only came up 6. Now, this adds another eerie synchronicity. The odds of 7 coming up so often and the odds of 4 coming up so infrequently are not only really low, but they are exactly the same, which is 0.83%. So less than a 1% chance of either of those occurring. But
Wow.
it gets weirder. I looked up to see what the numbers 7 and 4 mean in terms of numerology. And I am by far not an expert on the topic, but I've read a little bit here and there, as we do in this line of work. And here's a description I found for the number 7, the number we got the most. In numerology, the number 7 is often associated with deep introspection, spirituality, and higher wisdom. It is considered a highly spiritual number that symbolizes the seeker of truth. People who are influenced by the number 7 are thought to be analytical, thoughtful, and introspective, often delving into the mysteries of life and the universe.
No wonder it's always been my favorite number.
I'll give you, before we talk about it, I'll give you number 4 too. So the number that appeared the least, again, randomly generated by Google. In numerology, the number 4 is often associated with and hard work. It's viewed as a grounding number that brings structure and order. People influenced by number 4 are generally seen as reliable and dependable, with a strong sense of duty and a practical approach to life. So this means The number we got the most is associated with kind of a seeking of a truth, a communication, a spiritual side, and the number that appeared the least has to do with order. As we've been saying all along, the eclipse being at times when order is temporarily thrown askew. This has blown me away, Margot. I'm not even sure if I'm conveying it as much as I am, but the chances, the odds being so low of those two numbers appearing the way they did, and what they seem to represent, almost perfectly match what we were doing and kind of what was happening in the environment around us while we were all doing it.
I love weirdness so much. It just makes me so happy when things like this happen. This is fascinating. This is more than I thought we would have, in terms of something you can actually quantify, to have them both so far from the average. I love the Global Consciousness Project. In fact, I just listened to a seminar at the Society for Psychical Research a couple of weeks ago where he was once again talking about this, the presenter. And he was saying that actually they also have noticed there are jumps and irregularities in the randomness when there are really positive things that are happening in the world as well. Then when people join together for some kind of huge celebration, that they have noticed the same sort of thing. And so in terms of that, I'm not surprised that you would get, and I'd love to talk to them to see what the global consciousness numbers did, because they have little generators spirited away all over the world. And it is fascinating to get their reports from time to time and see what they've come up with. I wonder what they think of our little experiment. I'll have to ask them.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. I mean, that one really benefited from the more numbers we had to look at. But I didn't think we would see two that far on the edge that perfectly mirror each other in both probability and content.
I'm sure that there are people out there who are experts in numerology and reading of numbers. So, please send us your comments if you have knowledge that we do not. For me, I'm just fascinated by the weirdness of it. Now, I didn't know any of these results. You kept them to yourself very sneakily. So I'm hearing all of this for the first time too. And I'm just like smiling from ear to ear with how fabulously weird it's all getting.
Well, let's push the envelope maybe a little bit further. And I think it's time to talk about our Estes sessions that we did in these two different locations. We've talked about the Estes method before on the pod, but Margot, maybe since this is something you're often talking with our guests about during our investigations, what's the best way to describe, what the Estes method is and how we were approaching it in this context?
Sure. The Estes method is sometimes referred to as the spirit box experiment, but it's the name given to it by its inventors, Connor Randall and Carl Pfeiffer, was the Estes method. And it's a weird word, ESTES, but it's actually where in Colorado they invented it. So Estes Park, Colorado, the Stanley Hotel. The Estes method takes the idea of using a spirit box. Now, a spirit box is a radio receiver. You could use it to just play one radio station, but it's meant to scan through all of the radio signals on either AM or FM. It does it so quickly that generally it's less than half a second on each signal. So when you hear a spirit box out loud, it's very much a lot of static. You get the occasional blips of song maybe from the radio or a bit of radio announcer, but it's mostly static. The idea is that maybe spirits can grab the energy of those radio signals and manipulate them to form words. So they can answer our questions or just tell us what they want to know. And you listen to the spirit box, hoping to hear, how I put it is, the signal through the noise. So you're looking for a very clear word or set of words, like a sentence or a phrase, that is clearly not coming as a little blip of a voice of a radio show. And sometimes it's, super fascinating, but it can also be really frustrating because, of course, you really want to hear the answers. And so anytime a little weird sound or some voice type sound comes through, as the group, you're standing there going, oh, maybe it said this, maybe it said this. And it's very easy to convince yourself that you're hearing something when maybe you aren't. And the group dynamic really gets involved. So the inventors of the Estes method thought, what if you eliminated that problem by attaching the spirit box to a set of noise-reducing headphones, put them on a person, So now you see, essentially, you've made the person the receiver. They later also added a blindfold so that the person could no longer see or hear anything being said by their fellow investigators. So it's very important to understand that the person wearing the headphones with the blindfold on and listening to the spirit box can in no way hear the questions that are being asked. Nevertheless, the receiver's job is just to listen and say out loud anything that they hear coming through the spirit box or popping clearly into their mind. And sometimes the way the questions of the fellow investigators and the answers of the person who cannot hear the questions, the way that they line up is kind of extraordinary. I know that Connor Randall himself said that he thinks this method is not so much about the spirits manipulating the energy to form words as perhaps it is more of a barrier breaker for ourselves, that it breaks down that barrier we've put up, getting in our own way of hearing the voices of spirits that are trying to communicate directly with our minds. Greg Newkirk of the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal refers to this method as technologically assisted mediumship. So there's always a point when you're doing the Estes method, if you've sunk in enough and you do it for long enough, there's a point where it would be very difficult for the receiver to say if they were hearing those words through the headphones or through their mind. And to me, as a person who's done the receiving role in this experiment many times, to me, that's the weirdest and most exciting part of it.
If you're interested to try the Estes method, we do include it in our Alone in the Dark experiences. It's definitely a highlight of the evening because it does create, as I think you're saying, it's kind of an intimate personal connection for the person who is the receiver. But then when you see some of these context correct responses to the questions they don't know they're being asked, it's really spooky. It's absolutely fascinating. And I know you do a great job leading those sessions. So if you'd like to try it, definitely join us on Alone in the Dark, as we do try them at our 2 sites there.
Definitely. It's unlike any other experience you would ever have. Even if you're not the receiver, just being part of that session can be quite extraordinary.
Now, where exactly in the distillery district did you try the Estes method? And was there anything unique about the setup, I guess, compared to how you would normally do it?
Since it was such a special day, I did indeed add some special side notes to the regular Estes experiment that I do. First of all, we decided we would use the oldest building that's still standing in the historic distillery district. It's known as the Stone Distillery, and it is made entirely of limestone, which some people will be going, oh yes, because limestone is notorious at holding energy. It is from 1861. It is a massive 5-6-story building. At one point, it had a massive fire that burned out all the inside of the building, but the outside stayed standing. It was part of the factory. Lots of people working in there as part of the factory. As far as we know, none of them died in that fire, but pretty scary time. And now it is entirely offices. However, there's a giant stairwell. You got a lot of out of breath walking up to the very top, but it is more of a museum section. So we went to the very top of this kind of isolated stairwell, sat on the floor at the very top. There's a little round window above us that looked out to, where the sun would have been if the clouds weren't covering it. Because of the nature of the eclipse and the fact that it is something happening in the universe beyond our Earth, we set our intention for communication as twofold. One, to connect with any spirits or entities that were connected to the Stone Distillery or the historic distillery district at all. And two, we made an invitation for any entity from beyond this planet or beyond the nature of human to communicate with us as well. And that turned out to be a very interesting choice.
You picked a few clips for us. Let's just jump into the first one.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Here we go.
Feel disgusted.
Disgusted.
How come?
With Earth.
Yeah. Oh, us too.
Lately.
Yeah.
Your conscience
We have some questions.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it great on Earth?
Ultimately, I think.
No, I've said enough.
All right, that's eerie. That is eerie. Have you noticed a difference when talking to certain entities? Obviously, the case I'm thinking of here is something more traditionally paranormal, whereas I don't know if I've ever heard an Estes session that right out of the gates almost is so judgmental almost of the planet and the species. How did it strike you in the moment?
There have been a few occasions where I have felt that the contact was not earthly. Now, I will say that the offer we made to the entities, outside of the ghosts of the distillery was, is there anything you would like us to know? Do you have a message for us? Is there anything you'd like to tell us? Whereas for the ghosts, it was more, we're interested to know who's here, what is your personal history, and that sort of thing. So I was not expecting to get that sort of communication from what seems to be, as you say, an outside eye looking at the earth and making some sort of judgmental comment. I was not expecting it to come kind of right away, but it almost did come right away. We started out just with a bit of random communication. It seemed like we were connecting with something connected to the building. Somebody seemed to be talking about the equipment and the people who worked there, and then it got kind of interrupted by this other. And from then on throughout the session, it really shifted back and forth. And every time it was this other, this outside entity, I got the chills. And in fact, in some of the recording, you can hear me trying to breathe in really deeply and like calm myself down because I was like shaking. The energy coming through was just so overpowering that it was a relief when it went back to just the ghosts talking.
Our next Eclipse, I think, may be the same entity, follow on the same course, maybe have the same kind of energy. So why don't we play those now? And you can let us know if you felt this was a kind of a continuation of that first part of the conversation.
I am thrilled to meet you in a female voice.
Yeah.
I say, I can't move. I can move more at night.
Right?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Listen to me.
I am.
Is the totality
Yeah.
upon us?
Not.
Where to it
Yeah.
go? What should I hear? They're rising
Who's rising?
galore. Just like home.
Just
Yeah.
like home.
We look. We're a part of it. It's not our first rodeo.
No.
No.
Were you at the other eclipse years ago?
We're free. This clear air. What a gold mine.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of energy.
I said, Earthling, how are you?
I'm
We're
well.
okay.
What do you get with apricot? You get scraps from me. You got it.
Do you bake? Do you...
Earth, free, and horrible.
What the heck?
I know. So this long clip that you played, it definitely started out as it really felt like that the normal communication that I get at any haunted place, where it seems to be random spirits either connected with the history of the place perhaps, or dropping by because suddenly you've opened a channel and they just say hello, like, I'm pleased to meet you, and like this very happy voice, and she never came back, you know what I mean? But they just say hi and they go. Then it suddenly, you can almost hear it in the tone of my voice that it shifts out of this communication with the local to the distant, where it's like, is the totality upon us? I will say that, you can't help but start to build a story from these scraps in your mind. You never get quite as much information as you want, but I will say this was one of the weirdest and clearest sessions I have ever done. where I got such long sentences and the same entity talking, both ghost and perhaps not ghost, talking over such a long period of time. It's unusual. In talking to me, the story that like builds is one of they're looking at us and going, you don't know how good you have it. And yet you're just like squandering it. And it's just like, it makes you want to cry when you think about it. And yet they seemed really happy to be making communication with us.
The next clip kind of struck me maybe as a more traditional moment of spirit communication. So play that now. I'm interested to see how you kind of interpret it then and after.
Hi,
Hi. Yeah, there are so
I
many.
need some help.
What can we do for you?
I've lost my senses
Oh, okay.
still.
Yeah.
When I speak, then when I appear, it's in the back. It bothers people. It bothers the people.
I mean, to me, that sounds like what many of our ghost stories tell, which is becoming suddenly aware of a presence and then someone getting extremely frightened or scared. Did it strike you that way as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I had the very clear thought when it said, when I appear in the back. The Stone Distillery, as I mentioned, very, very, very tall building. But next to it, attached and made out of the same limestone, is what's known as the fermenting cellar. And it's a single-story building where over and over people have seen a full-bodied apparition of a man in old-fashioned work clothing. And he appears in the back of the room. He walks through the walls. He occasionally has talked to people. And when he said, when I appear in the back, then, it bothers people. And that's why he's like, I need some help. I've lost my senses. It actually, that thing of having lost their senses came through several times through that session. Like he really wanted us to know. And then you got to wonder, do they not know that they are a spirit? One of them said, help me, I can't smoke. Why? And it's like they're asking, why can't I do the things I used to do or feel things? And that's when you got to wonder, do they know that they're just spirit and not body now? But I did definitely get the feeling this was some spirit, whether it was that one that's known to be in the building or not. It definitely is the sort of thing that spirits tend to say, like, why are people afraid of me? Or, I need some help. Unfortunately, although we get asked for help in these sessions a lot, they never answer how you can help them. And sometimes I wonder if it's an expression of, like, they're still in that moment, whatever it was, perhaps where they died, or they're in an activity of the past where in that moment they needed help and didn't get it, rather than asking us now in the present to help them. So that's the theory that I'm working on lately anyway.
Maybe I'll play the next two clips together. And this one kind of puzzled me with some of the language that was used that made me kind of think one thing and then quickly switched to something else. And it involves a name that came up a few times. And I think we're only going to hear it once in this clip, but in some of the other clips, it came up as well. So there's two that are virtually back to back. So maybe we'll just let those play and see what we think.
I have an inkling, but my hardware has failed.
Oh. There's three of us, is that what you mean?
I've seen him.
Yeah.
Yep.
In this building?
He's been looking for you.
For me in particular, or?
Can somebody else help me?
Yes, how can I help you? Who are you?
Him?
You are him?
He's looking.
He's looking for you?
Is that
No.
No.
Neither.
He's looking for us?
Up and down. Here I come. I'm Michael.
Hi, Michael.
They were talking about Mike.
Me? I'm John.
Hi, John.
I'm going to stop it there before the next part of that clip, or the one that follows, plays. Just how do you interpret this with your, investigation experience? At the beginning, the use of the word hardware, I thought, was very notable and certainly non-organic. But then we kind of get this moment, which is kind of ominous with, I think it's he's here, he's watching you. It's Michael. And then the final name at the end is like, I'm Bob or something that seemed like completely out of left field. What do you make of the transition? Did this feel like two different voices? And obviously the name Michael coming up here so strongly and with an ominous tone, and in a few other clips as well. Do we have any knowledge of a Michael in the distillery district that somehow might play into the story there?
We haven't yet found a Michael that would play into this story. After I sent this for Jack to listen to, and Jack was like, oh yeah, at the top of that building, there is an office where the shop owner who worked in that office always felt a very dark negative presence there. And in fact, her dog would often bark and whine and refuse to be comforted. And, she tried various ways to clear or cleanse the energy in the office, and it would work for a tiny bit. And then she would get this dark feeling again. So that did seem to make some sort of sense with this, but we don't, of course, have any name attached to that. The feeling with the whole Michael in this context did have a very creepy vibe to it. And in this section of what you've played, I feel it was, at least 3 different voices. I'm not quite sure what the hardware, is it possible they were talking about the equipment that used to be there for the distillery, or is that back to being something else separate? I'm not sure. But all the rest of it was definitely somebody kind of warning us that Michael was coming. And then you get that weird, almost little like nursery rhyme that just sent chills down my spine. It was like,
up and down, here I come, I'm Michael.
There definitely was this feeling that it was trying to scare us. And we all felt a little creeped out by that part of it. However, did not feel in any actual sense of threat or anything like that. It really felt like he was a boogeyman type, like a sort of presence that tried to be spooky and wanted you to be scared, That's what it felt like.
We have one final clip, which maybe will end us on a bit of a lighter tone. I'll put that on now.
If only we could get out of here.
Yeah.
I gotta go.
Okay.
I loved this.
Thanks. Margot's looking directly at Jillian, by the way.
He died in his teens.
Oh.
Who did?
Run,
Ron.
dipstick.
Run right now?
Did he die here? Working here?
Just so y'all know, it's gonna be pretty radical for the next few semesters.
Okay.
How often do you find that the spirits or whoever you're communicating with will thank you for the experience or express some thanks? Because we'll hear that in mine as well, kind of a very similar kind of thing. Is this really common?
In my experience, it is. It's satisfyingly common because, so much of our paranormal investigation is us sitting around in the dark talking out loud, and you're just thinking, I really hope something's listening because this is really weird to be doing, if not, So yes, in my experience, it is quite common, and it's hard. Like, don't expect the first time that you are the receiver that you're going to get this level of conversation. Just putting that out there. Like I said, this was my best ever, and I still feel I could have been more discerning. I could have been deeper in, you kind of get into a bit of a trance mode, and it was pretty good, but it takes practice. But yeah, I have had many times they will say, I've got to go, but thank you. And, we'll say, oh, we'll come back and talk to you again. Okay. Along with that, the other thing that we often get is that they express how difficult it is. They'll often say, wait a minute, because they're trying really hard and we're going too fast, asking too many questions before they've had a chance. But I loved this one, especially because, like I said, in listening over a few times, Jillian said that as soon as I had said, if only we could get out of here, that I had been facing in this kind of neutral direction, not looking. I mean, I had a blindfold on, so I couldn't see anyway. But Jillian said I all of a sudden turned directly towards them and said, if only we could get out of here. And I realized later, like, oh, I think this spirit was a little sweet on Jillian. It was like, if only we could have a date. I've really enjoyed this. And I'd like to talk to you some more, sort of feeling, but quite a gentleman about it,
The other part that I thought was fun, it almost sounded a bit like prophecy at the end saying, I mean, it's going to be pretty radical for the next. And to me, that made me think, well, maybe the distillery is going to be a place of heightened activity for a while. Is that how it struck you?
Well, and part of the reason I was so happy Sarah could be there is because she's been doing a lot of research into the history of the distillery lately. And I knew she'd have all those facts and everything in her mind. And she was talking about how something we forget about the distillery is how before it became used as the, distillery it is now, where people can go and have a nice time, it was pretty derelict and run down, occasionally used for filming, but just kind of abandoned. And people often went and squatted there. And so, we're talking in the early 90s, and somebody saying it's pretty radical seems sort of a 90s, early 90s expression. And the word that I managed to come out with was semesters, but it didn't feel quite right, but I couldn't quite catch what they were trying to say. But I did very much take it as, yes, a bit of prophecy that whoever was talking, and it didn't, in this case, it felt like just some localized, sort of spirit was kind of saying, hey, like, hang on, because it's going to get pretty weird. And I didn't feel necessarily the distillery, but perhaps Toronto or Canada or the world. It was just kind of like, I can see what's coming, and it's going to be pretty wild for the next little bit. So hang on.
That was a great session. Very interesting.
It's that thing I always say, it just makes you want to go back and try again. Who else can we talk to, and will any of these come back? And I definitely want to do some more investigation at the distillery, because I suddenly realized we've not really talked to them, and they seemed really anxious to talk. So,
well, that was amazing. A little unsettling at times. I have a few clips from mine. Now, I'm by far not an expert on this method, but I've been spending a little bit of time with it and trying to become more and more comfortable with it. We were on the farm, as we mentioned, and one of the kind of nuances we tried was typically we have a blindfold on when doing this method to really separate obviously the receiver from the questioners in the room. But since I was wearing the glasses anyway and couldn't really say anything, I decided, well, what if I just stared at the eclipse while doing it?
I love that idea.
And I tried that for a bit, but I found it really difficult because so much, as you've kind of been saying, so much of this is about kind of intuition and kind of whispers and vague impressions of things that suddenly come to mind. I just found it too distracting. Looking at it, some extra light coming through, and we often do this at night or in darker places as well. So eventually I did have to close my eyes and just kind of go back to more traditional setting, if you will. But I have 3 clips that I'll share with you, and maybe you can ask me some questions about them after you hear them, and we'll see what these ones are like. So Michelle's asking me the questions, and I am the receiver.
I'll look around a little more on the horizon.
Day and the night.
Yes, we just came through an eclipse.
From beyond the 5th. Be brave.
Definitely, you need to be brave to be here, and we appreciate that you're here.
It's a jigsaw.
It is like a jigsaw, the eclipse and the sun disappearing. I'm glad you got to experience together. Yes, us too. It was an incredible experience.
Odd.
I mean, lovely. First of all, Michelle has an amazing voice, and you should definitely get her to speak on the podcast more often. We get to experience her amazing editor work on the sound. But yeah, she did a great job of encouraging whoever was talking to you to try to get them to continue talking. And by showing that she was trying to understand what they were saying, to me, it felt like you were communicating with someone who was in just as much awe of the eclipse as you were. Is that what you felt?
Yeah, it absolutely. And the kind of the in the 5th thing.
Yeah, what did you think that was? Of course, the only thing I thought was the beyond the 5th dimension.
That's kind of what I wanted to say, but I almost felt like I cut myself off
Yeah.
A moment of kind of self-editing occurred. If there was a moment in the whole session where I felt like perhaps something beyond human ghosts was enjoying the spectacle with us, it was then, because it did seem contextually appropriate and it felt like a presence, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely had its own voice, and, it is hard as the questioner to not end up speaking over top, because you don't know when the next moment is going to be, but you could still sense that whoever was communicating with you was maintaining their end of the conversation, regardless of being interrupted or anything like that. I loved the idea of it's a jigsaw. Michelle's interpretation is, yeah, it's like a jigsaw because it fits over top. And, if you're talking about the eclipse itself, but I also thought, well, what else could it be talking about? Is it talking about this form of communication or figuring out how to communicate with us like this is like a jigsaw, or it's a bit of a puzzle, you got to figure it out because, we never know for certain what they're talking about, but I love that clip. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the other one. And this one, honestly, I got a little freaked out, and you'll hear it in my voice. Like I sound really severe when I make a comment actually to Michelle, but that's because I was a little creeped out. I was a little scared.
That's okay.
Picking it up.
What are you picking up? Or are you following the eclipse yourself?
Tell me why.
Well, we're here to communicate, to open ourselves to communication so that we can learn more.
Way too forward.
Okay. I apologize if we're a bit forward. We're just very excited to speak with you.
Jim.
Jim, yes, that is who you're communicating through. Yes. He's very open to working with you and being polite.
I'm trying.
Good.
Hit.
We're trying too.
Help me.
How can we help you? Tell us how we can help you. Tell Jim how we can help you.
People's in the night.
In the night. It did feel like nighttime here. For a few minutes, it did seem like night when the full eclipse happened.
Jim.
Jim, yes.
This is Jim speaking. That's a female voice who's whispered Jim twice.
Okay. Welcome. Jim is very happy to talk to you, talk through you.
Who's at your right?
Oh, that's Michelle. I'm Michelle. I'm Jim's wife. We're very happy you're here and happy to talk
That's
to you.
right.
We're looking to have a positive and open conversation with you.
I just heard a male voice say Jim.
Okay, so there are two of you possibly here with us. A man and a woman.
All of us.
All of you are here with us. Wonderful. Well, we're glad that we're all together for such a big day, such a big event, the eclipse. And we welcome you here.
It's limited.
That's true. It only goes on for a short period of time. And we are only here for a short period of time.
It's not always the time.
No, that is true.
There's a lot going on here, Margot. Please help me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that moment where it says your name is definitely makes a little chill run down your spine. It's always weird to be recognized by name by unseen entities, no matter how you're communicating with them. But I will say, hearing it on an Estes method is better than it being called from an empty room in a dark building. But here, what's interesting, okay, so there's, again, so much to unpack, but I love this section of your session. Boy, it's a good one. The fact that you hear your own name being said over and over again, and you say you've heard it several times being whispered by this female voice, and then later on you say it was a male voice. So something that we do need to be careful of while using the Estes method is to be too careful putting too much significance to how the voice sounds, because we don't know how this works for them. We're only kind of guessing, and who knows what it does to their actual voice to be able to get us to hear it. So whether it was a female or a male or somebody who was not female or male, like we can't say for sure. Sometimes you do get a really strong impression of the feeling of who you're talking to that might give you a bit more of that information. But just to say, that's something to be careful of by saying, well, it can't be the same voice because that one was male and that was female. And plus, we can't really know for sure what gender they identify as. It could have been the same entity, is what I'm saying. But in this case, I think it was a different entity because of what follows next. Michelle says something like, oh, there's two of you here, perhaps, and they say, no, it's like all of us are here. And she's like, oh, well, that's, it's great. We can all be together for the eclipse. And they're like, no. And I really get the feeling they're trying to tell her that's not why we're here. It's not for the eclipse that we're here. And my impression is, and I'm not a psychic or anything, this is just me going off my experience, is that they came for you, Jim. Like, if I was a psychic, I would say, this is probably your family members or like your relatives coming to gather around because this is the first time you've opened yourself in this big of a way, with the eclipse in the middle of nowhere, for a long period of time. And it's possible that these spirits were connected to you in some way. I'm not saying they were, of course, we can't know, but that's the feeling that comes off of this section for me. And they're saying, it's limited. That they can only be there for a very short amount of time. So they're just wanting to say hi, basically, and it's like explaining to you why they can't stick around and tell you more. Basically, it's like it's limited. And I think Michelle's right when it's like, yeah, the energy of the eclipse is only going to last so long. And then the communication, it seems, will get harder. What about you? Did you have any impression on whether or not whoever was talking was connected to you? Or did you feel like it was just somebody grabbing your name and, trying to scare you with it or something?
Great questions. I did have a little bit of that impression. No, that's it. Like when I heard the male voice say my name, like that kind of freaked me out to the degree that I stopped repeating, obviously, what I was hearing and editorialized kind of the experience. So it was definitely a bit jarring in the sense that it felt extremely personal.
Yeah, I could sense that. Yeah, that makes sense.
I thought it was hilarious, though, when it said very, way too forward. When it asked what we were doing, Michelle tried to explain it.
So what's your take on that?
Well, we were kind of joking about that a little bit beforehand because we were on this farm. We have no idea of the history. We have no idea of any potential links to really people or places. It was in the middle of nowhere. But we were kind of joking like, well, it's such a nice, beautiful, serene spot. Are we just like disturbing whoever we're talking to who, like us, has just come out to and enjoying the nature, enjoying the event? But yeah, without knowing the question that Michelle had asked, and then that's how I had responded, I thought that was pretty funny.
It was pretty funny. I will say it makes me think of the times when you seem to be communicating with spirits who are still very much connected to the time period that they lived in. And it makes me wonder if the fact that, Michelle is a woman and she's the one who's obviously in charge of this session here and taking charge of the questioning and doing that bit of gatekeeping of like, trying to get them to communicate, that maybe for whoever it was who said that, they're like, you are being way too forward. We haven't even been introduced. And here you are, a woman just speaking out of turn and this sort of thing. I had a little laugh because that's the sort of impression I got from that moment. It was very cute. Way too forward.
One final one to share, which maybe is a good one to take us out on.
Did you used to live here?
I like this experiment. And that was really the end of it. And, again, it's hard for me not to be a little skeptical at times. Like, experiment was obviously a word very much on my mind as I'm there with the equipment on, holding the loonie, trying to send that out. But interesting nevertheless, and very similar to the clip you had for us as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the nice little, I like this experiment, when maybe they had been a little skeptical, but then they actually communicated and it's like, oh, this was nice, and maybe now they'll be disappointed that no one goes back and tries again, But yeah, there's something nice about, because we enjoy it so much and it's so interesting to us that maybe they do as well. And I will say too, to speak to what you were just talking about, how you're aware that you have these words in your mind, and this is why we still use the word experiment for this, because surely there is psychological stuff going on. Surely there's stuff that is coming through or out because of the focus we're holding in our minds. I will say, as the person who is on the receiving end, I try hard not to just kind of randomly talk. I try to honestly repeat what I believe I am hearing out of the box. But every once in a while, like I said earlier, if I think back on it, I honestly couldn't tell you if that voice came out of the headphones or came directly into my head in some other way, except all I can say is I don't say out loud my thoughts or what I'm thinking about it unless I say, this is Margot, this is feeling really weird now, or something like that. I only say what I hear. How I hear it, well, we don't know. Who's actually talking? Although we've been throwing around very easily this idea that we are in fact talking to the spirits of the dead, or we are in fact talking to entities from beyond this world, or spirits that are connected to this world. I must stress that we actually do not know in any way at all who or what we are talking to. All we know is this experiment is so interesting. Always so interesting. And I will continue this experiment. And I'm sure that now that you've tried it this many times now, Jim, that you're just as addicted to it now as I am.
It's one of those things that makes you want to try more. And the fact that we got such an overwhelming number of participants from our audience also makes me think we need to come up with some more group experiments that we can all try together, because that was super fun.
For me, it is the weirdness of the mystery of it all that keeps me engaged, even after all these decades being involved with the paranormal, and which will continue to keep me engaged. I love the idea of getting our listeners more involved with some experiments further on. I'm going to put my thinking hat on for that. There's certainly lots of other times of year with the, solstices and the equinoxes, or perhaps Halloween, where we could use the energies that everyone is aware and that is happening in the natural world to try again, to try something else, to see what happens. Anyone out there have some ideas for a group experiment? Let us know.
Now, if you're interested in hanging out with Margot in some spooky locations, you can join us on Alone in the Dark at Black Creek Pioneer Village or at Cumberland Heritage Village Museum. Margot's one of our outstanding hosts. We have quite a few, each of them with their own style and personality. And you can also find Margot, of course, doing some of our ghost tours as well. Margot, if people are interested in kind of following you a little bit more, I know you often are posting about some of the spooky things you're involved in. Is there a good spot for them to do that?
Yeah, probably the best way to follow what I do and to see some of my spooky posts is to follow me on Instagram. It's at Margot_thespian. That's because I'm also an actor, and that's an old-fashioned word for actor. So it's at MARGO_THESPIAN on Instagram. And be sure to say hi if you start to follow. And I hope to see you out at one of our investigations or one of our tours. I know Jim and I are always got our hands rubbing together, wondering where else we can go investigate and what other kind of mischief we can get up to. And always love it when you come along on those adventures with us.
I hope you found the results of our experiments as fascinating as I did. And a huge thank you to all of you out there who participated and played along. We could not have done it without you. thanks as well to Margot MacDonald for joining us and providing their insights. And also to our team members in Toronto, Jillian and Sarah, who helped us with the experiments, and Michelle Dennis for not only helping out with the experiments, but editing this episode. For information on any of our ghost tours, paranormal investigations, and online experiences, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Haunted Walk, and be sure to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen, especially if you want to brag about getting one of the answers correct. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.
Here comes the sun.